Okay, Mr. Cherniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Oops, that's not where I was going to start. I'll go to the right page. Okay. So, Mr. Lee, Mr. Kahar brought you to a Google map that showed you a route to the KDA from your house. You recall that?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to just describe the same numbers that you gave looking at a map of the KDA, which is on the screen here. So from your house over around here to Yonge Street, how far is that?
That's probably 900 meters.
Okay, and from Yonge Street to the north boundary of the KDA, how far is that?
That's probably 300. Actually, I don't know exactly, just approximate, okay?
Okay, so that I misunderstood. So thank you for clarifying that. So let's go now to the map that Mr. Kahar used, which is Exhibit 70. And he asked you about the possibility of going from your house up to 19th Avenue, right?
Yeah.
And that's Bayview and then Leslie and then the 404, right? Off the map.
Yes.
Okay. If you wanted to get to the highway by going east along 19th Avenue, what would you have to do after you got to 19th Avenue?
Because from 19th, you cannot direct access 404. Either will go up or go back to Egg Mills.
So you would have to go to 19th, go up, and then come back down south to Elgin Mills to enter the highway?
Probably I will go down to Egg Mills because go up is too long.
Okay. By go up, you mean alternatively north to Stouffville Road?
Yeah, that's too far. Yeah, if no special, I won't do that. That's crazy.
Mr. Kahar brought you, not to this one, sorry, to the tab 2 of the YRA document book, which is this population and job forecast. And he highlighted for you this number 510. I just wanted to ask you, what is this number 635?
Oh, that's the density, but the developer density. So basically based on the developer land, that's density.
So so 635 is based on the developable land? Yeah,
510 is the gross. Yeah. Actually, if you're going down, I can answer. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I will move on from there. Don't worry. I'm just trying to go in the order that the questions were asked. Mr. Kahar brought you to the holding provision table. So this is in the secondary, the proposed modifications to the secondary plan. And he suggested to you that the unit count does not matter and you disagreed. Why do you disagree?
Because unit number associated with residents, right? If you build more unit, obviously you can have more people to live in. That's straightforward. Right now, I believe that 110 I found, actually last time I point to wrong draft, is not include the common areas. So that's the same case.
So let's just finish with this first. So he brought you to under 10,400 and said, as long as you have a resident cap, the unit count doesn't matter, right? That was his.
Matter. Otherwise, how can you count the people?
So let me ask you something. Does that argument apply in line D as well, greater than 12,650?
Yeah, because even if you use people and the resident, you still based on assumption. For example, if I approve the 5,000 units, each unit has 2 residents, you still have to based on the unit and per unit, how many resident assumptions. So the unit, you cannot avoid it. Otherwise, you cannot get this number.
Okay. Mr. Kahar brought you to the MTSA map.
Mhm.
And he was asking you, he was saying, if you have lower density areas here, don't you have to make up for it there, right?
Actually,
Do you recall that question?
I recall, and also here I want to give, because this is very misleading, I want to give a detailed explanation. Yes, you can use a 500 meter or 800 meters. 500 meter means that land is 78 acres. 800 is exactly 2 square kilometers or 200 acres. That's for study area, but nobody use that 78 acres or 200 acres for the boundary, because that doesn't make sense. That's why either the province, either the York region or each municipal, they pick up the land suitable for MTSA and then draw a boundary. Otherwise, we have a 72 MTSA right now, right? You can simply say each one is 78 acres. Actually, it's much less, probably half. So, or you can use, let's say, each MTSA 200 acres. Actually, I found the evidence. The York region did specify only 500 meters, not 800 meters, also in the same document. So that's why the York region target is based on the boundary. It's based on within the boundary how to specify the density. So that 200 unit, 200 people job per hectare is based on within the boundary, not out that 500 circle. That's to be clear. Otherwise, a big misleading.
Okay. Now, Mr. Kahar asked you to note what some of these areas are over here. I'm going to ask you if you can see my mouse. What is this over here?
That's, I think, one is Toyota, I think, auto shop, Toyota sales. Another one is another Korea, maybe Kia, I think, auto sales.
Okay. And do you know what's...
I can tell you right now, as Ms. Kaha said, some area high, some area low, right? If based on York region, this total area will be a 200 people jobs per hectare, right? For this whole MTSA boundary, we need to put 12,000, let's say below 13,000 people on the job, but only that is 40% KDA. We are
Mr. Lee, I don't want you to, Mr. Lee, I don't want you to repeat yourself. I'm trying to direct you to some issues that need clarification that you haven't said already. So what is in this area up here?
I think right now there are some like the private schools, daycare that cannot.
So
that's
when
gas
Mr.
station, that's gas station, I believe.
When Mr. Kahar says, if you have a lower density area here, do you have to make up for it there? Is that the only area in the MTSA where you can make up for lower densities?
The reality is that if we use the proposed density for KDA, and then we use all the numbers required for the whole MTSA, we even have to remove 2,000 jobs and residents from from outside KDA. So it means the other 60% have to remove resident and job to satisfy 200.
If I asked you what all the different development applications are within this red and proposed MTSA boundary, but outside the KDA, would you be able to answer that?
Yes, right now everybody.
You know all the applications at the city of Richmond Hill right now?
I know there are 5 live applications within this boundary, this circle, within this circle.
I'm talking about the whole red area.
Anything about the circle, I don't know. Within the circle, I know there are 5.
Okay. In response to Mr. Kahar, he brought you to the staff report tab 31, and I believe it was this paragraph. You said you wanted to say more about this paragraph. What did you want to say?
Oh, first, I think York region clearly specified 500 meters, not 800 meters, because 800 meters usually is for the, I think, Metrolink, those mobility hub, high level, like anchor hub or a gateway hub. We are, our MTSA, only one qualified, that's probably in Richmond Hill, that's Richmond Hill centers. So right now, for the MTA study, we use 500.
Okay. So I'm turning now to tab 40 of the document book. This is the exhibit 1. This is the unit count that Mr. Kahar had you looking at,
Yeah.
right? And he was asking you about the common area, whether they had been excluded, right?
Yes, I made a mistake. Actually, it's 2 lines down. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Are you referring to this line here?
Yes, yeah, I forgot. I pointed to the wrong place. The top
So-
one was not 15. So
that says assume 15% of res
Yeah.
component as common
Yeah.
areas, right?
yeah. So I pointed to the wrong place.
So are you saying that the common areas are included or excluded from the 110?
It is not included.
Okay. And is that the same as the regional use of the 110 number?
No, the regional include 15% and also for 2 residents. So that's why Richmond Hill and the York region at least has 20% difference, 20 or 22%. Yeah.
Mr. Kahar mentioned some different measures to mitigate traffic accidents, such as pedestrian countdowns, red light cameras. Do you know whether any of those measures have already been installed in the area that you're looking at?
I didn't pay attention. I don't know. Oh,
Okay.
Sometimes they have warning. They have like a sign warning. Okay, you are over speed.
Okay. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
May
And
I
that,
clarify some issues?
Sorry, Mr. Lee, that's all for your evidence. Mr. Chair, that also concludes my case.
Okay, thank you. So we are at 11:33 and the next was the cities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The city intends to call 2 witnesses as part of its reply case. The first witness will be Carl Wong, who will be recalled to deal with transportation issues. Mr. Kahar will lead him through his reply evidence. I expect in Chief and Cross that will probably take us to the lunch break. And after the lunch break, we will be recalling Ms. Anderson to give reply evidence.
So do we want Mr. Wong to get set up at the witness podium?
Yes, please.
So, Mr. Wong, can you hear me? Yes. You're still under oath or affirmation, whatever you did before. Did you, you did swear yourself before, right? When you testified? Sorry, is that right? Can you hear me now?
From here, I see that. From here, I see that she's on mute.
I think she was off it before.
Oh, okay, now she's off.
Was there a little window that popped up that said like there was some device?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just click OK.
Do I need to say over here?
No, it should be fine. You can do a microphone test on the Zoom window. Where it says the mute button there.
Yep.
Click the triangle. Do a microphone test.
Hello?
Can you hear me now, Mr. Wong?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
So you are still under oath or affirmation from the last time you testified? I just remind you of your oath or affirmation.
Understand.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Kahar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning or almost good afternoon, Mr. Wong. Mr. Wong, you were present for the examination and cross-examination of Mr. Anil C. Goban, at least virtually.
Yes, I was.
All right, and so you'd recall that in his oral testimony, but not in his witness statements or reply witness statements, he opined that a 23% modal split for the KDA was achievable in the 2041 time horizon of the plan, but that a 30% modal split for the KDA was not. And further, he formulated his opinion by relying in part on your Yonge and Clark example. Has his opinion caused you to revisit your opinion? Why or why not?
Yes, it has. First, I want to clarify that Mr. Seagoben misinterpreted the example that we provided. The use of Yonge and Clark was actually brought up to demonstrate that we can achieve a higher mode split with one transit line or one transit service. It wasn't intentionally brought up to say this is exactly comparable to the Yonge-Bernard KDA. However, in looking at the comparison between the two.
Mr. Chair, to what Mr. Wong just said, I asked him questions very directly about whether Yonge and Clark was comparable to the KDA under cross-examination. I don't know that this should be an opportunity to revisit those questions.
Mr. Chair, the witness is addressing the new evidence from Mr. Seagoben that came out in oral testimony after Mr. Wong had already given his evidence regarding the 23% modal split. In order to respond to that, he needs to go in and respond to the specific evidence that Mr. Seagoben provided on that.
So I do not object to responding to the 23% modal split. I think that's fair, but I think going back to Yonge and Clark and how it compares to the area is something he's already had a chance to answer. This is reply evidence. It's very limited.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Seagoben's evidence on why a 23% modal split was his recommendation was in part, or perhaps even fully reliant on the Yonge and Clark example. So I think it's incumbent on Mr. Wong to provide his evidence on that point.
If you don't object, sorry. If you don't object to the panel reorienting itself a bit with a few more sentences on this subject, it will help us. Thank you.
I do not object.
Okay.
So go ahead, Mr. Wong.
Yes, I was coming to the point that in arriving at the 23%, which was based on Yonge Clark, Bernard KDA actually has more transit services than your Clark. Bernard KDA has access to.
So this is precisely what I was objecting to, because Mr. Seagoben should have been able to respond to this evidence, and it was put to this witness in cross-examination. He's already had an opportunity to say this.
Let's treat this as step one. Again, I'm just trying to understand what he's talking about right now. So a few more sentences on this topic. I don't think we can really rule out of order at this stage.
Yes, I was saying that the Bernard KDA has access to 4 local services and a Bernard bus terminal, which Yonge Clark does not have. Yonge Clark only has access to the Yonge service, the bus service, mixed traffic as well as HOV lanes, and 1 service in terms of Clark. So its comparison to Yonge Bernard is not comparable in that Bernard KDA does have more transit service. And I'd like to clarify that the access to the GO transit, even though it's outside of the MTSA area, that's a 5-minute bus ride via Route 86. The 20-minute bus ride that has been provided in evidence is a route that uses a Yonge down to Major Mac and transferring to Major Mac to the access to go.
So, Mr. Chair, again, in cross-examination, Mr. Wong, I believe, told me it was a 20-minute ride. So he can't be changing his evidence now. It's not fair to Mr. Segoben, and it's not fair to my client.
I don't think are you getting any issues with that?
He's telling us a story, right? And right now, the panel, half of it anyway, hasn't got his story quite right. And I'm appreciating him. I don't want him to be repeating evidence, but if he could just repeat enough of it that we understand where he's going. And you can feel free to object to specific questions in the future, no problem, okay?
In addition, the 23% that we determined, of which Mr. Segoben also repeated, is restricted or confined to Young Clark. He brought up the potential that Steeles, which is 1 kilometer away, has influence in this area. But if we actually included Steeles in our calculation of transit mode split, this area would actually have over 30% transit mode split. So the point that Mr. Segoben raises, when you extend this coverage further and further away to capture such influences as Steeles and Finch, well, you could do the same thing for Yonge and Barnard, that if you extend far enough, you'll capture multiple transit lines. So we disagree that this is served by one transit line and it has access to multiple transit services, which are higher than and more than Young Clark.
So Mr. Wong, Mr. Segoben in his oral testimony opined there were, and I think it was no examples of where a 30% modal split could be achieved with one transit line. Has that opinion caused you to revisit your opinions on modal splits? Why or why not?
Yes, it has. I won't repeat this, but we provided examples of other locations. But I think the key point again is what it raises, that when you extend the coverage, as Mr. Segoben raised, there is no area that would have only served by one transit. If you extend the area 1 or 2 kilometers away, you will always run into a second or third transit service inside the city of Toronto. So when you do that, you will naturally come to an area where it is not served by one transit line. And that's the case for Yonge Barnard KDA as well, when you do extend 2 kilometers away from the site. We also looked at reviewing transit mode splits that were, as Mr. Segoben put it, influencing the area of Young Clark. And we have prepared an exhibit that shows the transit mode splits in York Region as Toronto. And I would like to take the board to a map that summarizes the mode splits to describe my point further.
So, Mr. Chair, all parties have known that the modal split was going to be an issue since the issues lists were served. It's completely inappropriate to be giving new documents related to that.
So, Mr. Chair, the intent of the document is to respond specifically to 2 points. One, Mr. Segoben's new evidence that he supports a 24% modal split, and second, his opinion evidence that a 30% modal split is not achievable. In his evidence, at least through his witness statements, he indicated nothing regarding a 24 or 30% modal split. His evidence was limited, and if I were to draw from it, I would have assumed, although it wasn't explicitly stated, that he was saying the only modal split achievable was 17%, but even that wasn't explicitly stated.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Segoben's witness statement was very clear that he thought 30% was not achievable. Whether he thought it was 17 or 24 is not material to this matter. The point is the city knew that he said 30 was unachievable, and it was Mr. Wong's chance to reply to that in his reply witness statement and the evidence that he gave and in response to cross-examination. If he's allowed to introduce a new document region-wide on modal splits relating to 30%, then Mr. Segoben needs to have a chance to respond to that. And it's just not procedurally the way this is done. It's case splitting.
We agree with you this time, Mr. Cherniak.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wong, could you address the question I've raised with you without going to the document?
Yes, I can. In Mr. Siegelman's evidence, he brought up the issue of, or the influence of the Finch Station and service on steels and how that affects Young Clark. Based on that evidence, we would assert that any mode splits in that area would eventually come further north as the subway is extended to Yonge and Highway 7. So whatever mode splits are experienced today around Finch Station, around Steeles, around Young Clark, when the subway gets extended from Finch to Yonge and Highway 7, all the characteristics and travel patterns and mode splits that have connection to the subway extension would extend into Elgin Mills and the Bernard KDA. The distance of which the influence has from Finch Station to Steeles and Young Clark and parts to the north is approximately 6 kilometers, of which we see high mode splits. If the subway was extended to Yonge and Highway 7, that same 6 kilometers of high mode splits would also extend into this KDA, which is approximately 6.5 kilometers away. So based on that, these mode splits are well above 30%. And in 20 years, we would support that the same 30% or more could be achievable with the extension of the subway to Yonge and Highway 7.
So Mr. Wong, Mr. Siegelman in his oral testimony opined for the first time that he agreed with peak hour spreading, but thought a 5% reduction in traffic volume should be applied and not a 10% reduction as you did in your analysis. Do you have a response regarding Mr. Siegelman's opinion on a 5% peak modal split reduction in traffic volumes?
Yes, I do. The 10% is reasonable, and Mr. Siegelman already mentioned that it's already occurring today, and we've already provided evidence that it's occurring today, and those ranges are well in the 10% range. So if you look at 20 years from now, we would expect that peak spreading to continue to occur. Therefore, 10% is actually conservative, given that we have 10 to 20 years for that peak spreading to occur. Mr. Siegel also mentioned the inflexibility of certain land uses to participate in peak spreading and noted that schools have certain schedules. Based on my review of the school schedules and start times for all the elementary schools in this area, they have staggered and various start times ranging from anywhere from 8 to 9 a.m. for Trillium Public School, for Moraine Hill Public School, Bernard Public School, and even the high school. They all have different stagger times, and this helps and assists in peak spreading as passengers or students that are dropped off by parents, as well as the travel by themselves, result in different times of periods that they travel in.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Siegelman in his oral testimony opined for the first time that a 15% modal split on Bathurst Street is achievable within the 2041 time horizon, but his opinion was that a 20% modal split on Bathurst Street was not achievable. Do you have an opinion on Mr. Siegelman's opinion on this?
Yes, the 15% raised by Mr. Siegelman wasn't supported or backed by any evidence. The evidence that we provided for existing already showed that it's 10% today. So in 10 to 20 years, it is foreseeable and very achievable that mode split could reach 20%. Given that Bathurst, as well as Bayview, the two surrounding roads, have a transit priority, proposed transit priority services on these roads based on the York Region's Transportation Master Plan.
Mr. Wong, Mr. Seagoban in his oral testimony provided an entirely new analysis that was not disclosed in his witness statement, whereby, and this is of some length, so bear with me, but he increased the traffic volume by 7% due to the modal split for the KDA that he opined could only reach 23% and not 30%. He increased the traffic volume by 5% because of peak hour spreading, because in his view, 10% was not realistic. He added a 5% increase in traffic volume because he says a modal split of 15% is not achievable on Bathurst Street, or 15 is achievable, but 20 is not. And he added another 10% increase in traffic because he says PM traffic was not considered. And after applying all of these revised calculations, he concludes that this would result in a VC of 1.30. Do you recall all of that evidence?
Yes, I do.
All right. And do you agree with the adjustments to traffic volume that Mr. Seagoban has made? And assuming they are made, would they result in a VC of 1.3?
First, I'd like to say that we disagree with the assumptions and that you can combine or put them all together in one pot. We're dealing with 4 different variables here. I already spoke to the transit mode split and the peak hour spreading. In regard to the Bathurst Street situation, just because you may not be able to reach a transit mode split on Bathurst doesn't mean you add the traffic back to Yonge corridor or Yonge at Elgin Mills specifically. You would have to do an exercise of rediverting that trip or to tolerate the operations on Bathurst Street. And in regard to the 10% increase in PM traffic, again, you can't mix AM and PM. If PM is higher, then that's a separate analysis. But if you look at AM only, if you were to agree with all of these additional increases, you can only combine the impact or effect of lower transit mode split, a lower peak spreading, and potential diversion due to Bathurst not reaching its mode split. But you can't add the PM to the AM and combine everything. If you were to believe all these assumptions and combine them and did the actual analysis, which Mr. Seagoban didn't do, it's an oversimplification that you just add up all these percentages and come up with 1.3. When you do the analysis, you would only get a 1 to 6% increase to the VRCs that we determined at Yonge Bernard. And in summary, that's about 4 to 9% above capacity compared to the 30% above capacity that Mr. Seagoban determined.
All right, Mr. Wong, and Mr. Seagoban in his oral testimony took issue with HDR not undertaking a PM peak hour analysis and concluded that understated traffic volumes. Do you have a response regarding this opinion?
Mr. Chair, that was an issue in this hearing. It was in all the witness statements. Mr. Wong has already had an opportunity to comment on it. I can find the issue number if I need to. Sorry, it may have been in his reply as opposed to.
I didn't think it was an issue on the issues list, but.
PM. Oh. So, Mr. Chair, I apologize. It was not a listed issue, but on page 6 of Mr. Seagoben's witness statement, he does say the trip and I can share this if needed. It was an answer to issue 18.
Mr. Cherniak, if you could, just for my benefit, so I don't have to.
Right. So this is the witness statement. The trip generation rates for the weekday PM peak hour were not included and is a critical piece missing from the HDRTIS for review.
Okay,
Okay,
Mr. Kahar.
I'll move on. That's fine.
Okay.
Mr. Wong, Mr. Seagoben in his oral testimony opined that the transportation network for the Yonge Bernard KDA lacks east-west connectivity, and he identified a number of additional connections and took the tribunal to a specific exhibit. Do you have an opinion on that opinion?
Yes, I do. The exhibit that Mr. Seagoben used was a screen line graphic from our report. And it was, exhibit, it was exhibit 4-18 in our report on page, sorry, my computer just died rebooting, but it was the 2041 background screen line results, and in that a graphic, Mr. Seagoben raised the issue of an issue with the screen line results, and basically concluded that there were capacity constraints based on the result. If you examine that graphic, the entire screen line is shown green, which indicates to the reader that there should be no issue with the screen line. If there's a specific road or a specific link that may be yellow or red, that indicates that particular road may have a concern. But overall, when comparing all the roads that pass through the screen line, if it shows green, that means there's an opportunity for traffic to redistribute, and drivers will learn over time which roads are the best ones to use to cross that screen line. Based on that screen line analysis for 2041, we do not believe there's an east-west capacity issue. We already, Mr. Seagoben raised that there may be missing connections or connectivity in between in between Elgin Mills and 19th Avenue, and had proposed a bunch of road connections. In my opinion, those road connections are not needed, as there's already a planned grade separation on Elgin Mills, and there's also widening of 19th Avenue that's going to provide sufficient capacity for the KDA traffic and background traffic to use both of those roads. Mr. Seagoben also testified that he wasn't aware of any north-south connection to reach 19th Avenue. Based on the existing network, there are roads such as Devon Sleigh and Woodstone that lead you up to 19th Avenue from the KDA. Although the KDA may not go up north to use 19th Avenue to head back south, this route is available for background traffic and existing traffic to do that maneuver. All the areas to immediately north of the KDA have access to 19th Avenue, and including myself, which is located just slightly north of the KDA, and they all have access to use 19th. Background traffic have access to 19th as well. All that would do is to provide the capacity that KDA traffic can use on Elgin Mills and other streets that are located to the south.
Before Mr. Kahar moves on, can we be told what the page reference is for that screen line that was referred to?
My computer's rebooting and I'll be able to provide that.
And Mr. Chair, I can advise I have no further questions, so I'll just wait for Mr. Wong to identify that page number. And
Okay, I'm back in the document and let's see. Okay, so exhibit 4-19 in our report corresponds to page 56 and 57. Specifically, Exhibit 4-18 was used by Mr. Siegelman in his evidence, and that's on page 56. So it's the east-west screen lines under background conditions, and he was pointing to the yellow arrows, and I'm referring to the green bigger arrows that are shown for the screen line.
And when you said our report, what's the
Oh,
title?
sorry, the HDR report.
so that's Exhibit 1, tab 39, page 2714 and 2715 of the continuing record.
That's
Further
it?
questions for me?
Okay.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go from here? We're at noon, which is a little ahead of schedule. Do you want to continue?
Well, I'll be fairly brief in cross-examining after that.
Okay.
And I don't know about the other parties.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Tran.
Sorry, any other parties of like interest first?
It's Mr. Kagan. I don't have any questions of this witness.
Mr. Cherniak, I have none either. Thank you.
I have none either. It's Mr. Annabelle.
Anyone else?
No questions from the region.
Questions from me, sir.
I'm sorry?
No questions from North Elgin.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Wong.
Afternoon.
You mentioned in your evidence this morning, Yonge and Steeles. My recollection is that you actually referred to Yonge and Steeles already in your reply witness statement, didn't you?
I don't believe so, but if you have a specific location, I can confirm.
See if I can find it. Yes, so I'm going to share that. So this is your reply witness statement. I'm looking specifically at paragraph 47 here. You can take a moment to read it.
Yes.
So in your reply witness statement, you did opine that Yonge and Steeles was comparable to the KDA because it was able to reach 30% modal split for transit, right?
I didn't say it was comparable. I just say these are example corridors that have reached 30% or more.
Right, but why would you be listing them if you were not suggesting they were comparable? What was the point?
This was in response to Mrs. Segovin, who proposed additional locations such as Highway 7 that did not reach 30%. And so we responded to that comment to say that, well, we can locate example corridors that have 30%. So it's not necessary that this is comparable directly to the Bernard KDA that we were making that point.
So Mr. Segovin says, I have an area that is comparable and did not reach 30%. Your reply was, well, I have an area that did reach 30%, but you're not suggesting it's comparable. It just happens to be another area that reached 30%.
I believe he was making that same point too when he was referring to Highway 7. That wasn't comparable to the Bernard KDA. He just noted Highway 7 has a Viva service, but didn't reach 30%. And so we responded that, well, it's not just looking at whether you have Viva service, you have to have the supporting land use to go with it. And Highway 7 hasn't matured yet in terms of all the proposed development that's going on. And so we just provided another area that has reached 30% where you have transit service and the supporting land use to go with it.
Comparable to the KDA.
Is not comparable to the KDA directly at Yonge and Steeles.
Great. You suggested this morning that when the subway is built to Highway 7, the modal split at Finch will move north, right?
Correct.
Do you know when the subway extension to Finch and Yonge was completed?
It has not been completed yet and has been...
Sorry, Finch and Yonge.
Finch and Yonge. I don't know the exact date, but in terms of decades, it's probably in the 60s.
Do you know what the modal split was at the time it was completed?
No, I didn't. They did not track transit mode split back then. The earliest transit mode split that was tracked is 1986 or 81.
So do you know what the modal split at Finch and Yonge was in 1986, about 20 years after it was built?
No, I do not. I have not extracted those results.
So when you talk about the modal split from Finch moving north, wouldn't it be reasonable to assume that the timelines would be similar? If it took 20 years at Yonge and Finch, it would take 20 years at Yonge and Highway 7?
That would be oversimplification. As I mentioned, it would also depend on the supporting transit land use that would be located in an area, as well as if Yonge subway extended, which is planned to be 2031, there's still time for mode splits to increase by 2041, which is our target for the 30%.
And in fact, Yonge and Highway 7 right now is, there's a few single family homes, but it's essentially non-residential now, isn't it?
Not exactly. Yonge and Highway 7 itself has a commercial area to the northeast, but north of all that area are condominiums and townhouses, as well as single detached housing that's immediately north of that commercial area.
Okay. When you talk about, and then you also said 6 kilometers north, I gather Yonge and Clark is about 6 kilometers north. Is that the concept?
No, Young Clark is actually less than 6 kilometers. 6 kilometers to the north would take you up to Highway 407, which is where the extent of the high mode splits extend to due to the influence of the Finch subway.
Well, you're saying that, but none of that evidence was provided before today, was it?
It exists in the TTS. We just extracted it.
Okay. And when you say Yonge and 407, you're referring essentially to the Markham, the southern side of Yonge and Highway 7, right? Just to ensure everyone understands that.
Yeah, I'm using 407 as a boundary. Yeah, so if it's to the south, yes.
And we've heard from a different witness, I thought, that construction was going to begin on the Yonge Street extension in 2031. Is that, did I hear that wrong? Because you just said, I thought it's going to be completed in 2031. What is the actual timeline?
I don't have the construction schedule, but in terms of planning documents and studies that we've done for TTC and Metrolinx, 2031 has been used as the time for the analysis of including that subway extension.
Would you agree with me that the Ontario line, that line we know is already now supposed to start construction, right?
Are you asking me the exact date of when that is?
No, sorry. The reason I'm bringing it up is that I don't believe construction has started on the Yonge extension. In fact, it has started on the Ontario line, and the government has said the Yonge Street will not go ahead until the Ontario line is complete. So I want to make sure we're dealing with the right timelines here.
Correct. The Yonge extension is not under construction. Ontario line is still being studied. Construction hasn't started on Ontario line either.
And the Ontario line comes before the Yonge subway extension, right?
Correct.
Now, in your evidence, you, Mr. Kahar asked you a lengthy question, and you suggested that Mr. Segovin had added the PM and AM hours. I don't recall that. Are you able to show me in the documents what you're referring to? And I should say, when I say I don't recall it, I'm not accepting that he did do that.
Okay. Yes, it was in his evidence that he added the numbers from the various assumptions, as Mr. Kahar put it. If you looked at 23 instead of 30, you now have 7% difference. 5 instead of 10, you add the 5 to it.
Right. So I remember that calculation. Yeah. I'm just asking specifically where you say that he added the AM and PM hours. Show me which part of the PM hours was he adding in? Can you show me in your HDR report?
It's not in the HDR report. He added it when he derived the 1.3. The 1.3 comes from 1.27 added to, sorry, 0.27 added to the 1.03 that exists at Yonge and Elgin Mills. The 0.27 is made up of the 7, the 5, the 10, and the 5 all added together.
The 7, sorry, you just went through the numbers, the 7, the 10, the 5. Which of those is the PM hour?
The 10% difference between the PM and AM is what he added to get to the 27.
And he was doing that because he suggests you should have considered the PM hour in your analysis, right?
Yes, but no analysis was provided by him. So he added it to the AM to arrive at the 1.3.
So what?
You can't do that.
Well, no PM analysis was provided by you either, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to put it to you that he was trying to find an easy way to estimate what the effect of the PM hour would be under the limited circumstances of his retainer. You can say that he's wrong, but I think you've gone further than that and suggested there was absolutely no logic to what he did. I don't think that's fair.
Correct. There's no logic because you can't simply make that calculation. Even though 10 PM may be 10% higher, you may still end up with the same analysis findings because the specific movements that the PM is critical at is not the same as the AM. So if you look at the BA report, they come to the same conclusion that AM and PM have the same results, even though PM may have slightly higher traffic.
But the BA report used less commercial gross floor area than you did, didn't they? We've already been through all of that.
Yes, they did, but one thing they didn't account for, or Mrs. Siegelman didn't account for when describing that, is the pass-by traffic, and that a lot of the retail uses today that are being replaced by other retail, more retail and residential, needs to be subtracted away from the existing network or future network. So the net result of PM is not as high as AM.
So if I heard you right, what you're really saying is what he did is not the correct way to do it by adding the PM hours. He could be wrong, but you haven't run the numbers to determine whether he actually is wrong.
Well, we ran the numbers in based on the BA report that has AM and PM. And the result is that they have the same V/C ratios and level service, maybe a 0.01 difference. So if you ran the same AM increases due to lower mode split, peak spreading, and shifting of bathers, you would get the same result for AM and PM because the starting point is the same.
You ran the BA numbers for the PM. Mr. Siegelman was using your numbers, right? There was a difference.
Mrs. Siegelman referred to the BA to make the comparison of AM and PM because we did not have the PM analysis or numbers in our report. And the BA study showed that these numbers are the same in terms of the analysis findings.
So what you're both doing is you're both making assumptions based on the BA's PM analysis without actually doing a PM analysis, right?
Well, we did analysis in that we peer reviewed it. So we had to come up with our review of that analysis, and same as Mr. Siegelman. And I understand that he agreed with BA's analysis, and we as well in terms of that regard.
And in fact, I think your evidence was that you accepted BA's analysis for 3.0 FSI, right?
That was for 2031 under different circumstance. Land uses, a broader study area, and additional analysis was done to confirm that. So through independent analysis, yes.
So I'm going to go, you had talked about this arrow here, and I asked you the page reference. So this is it here, right?
Correct.
Okay, and Mr. Siegelman was pointing at the yellow arrow here, correct?
Correct.
And you're referring to the green larger arrow there, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. And so Mr. Siegelman's point was that he had some concern about this yellow arrow. And I gather your point was that because the larger area is green, you're not concerned about this yellow area. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. And I think his objection was that you've gone too large with this green area and it should have been smaller. And if you did that, then there would be larger concern for the yellow area, right?
Well, the methodology would be incorrect because this was our approach to broaden the area to cover exactly what the public comments had in terms of the BA study. And we extended it to go one arterial on all four sides of our KDA.
So I understand you disagree with him, but I just want you to admit that it's because there's a disagreement about whether you should have expanded the study area the same way, right?
Yeah, we disagree. I don't recall his testimony on that, but yeah, if there was a difference of opinion, yeah, we would disagree on that point.
In the evidence you just gave, you talked about other routes from the KDA to Gamble or 19th Avenue, right?
Correct.
So we're looking at Exhibit 70 here. This is the KDA here, right? And this is Yorkland. And as you go north, is it, because you said Devonsley, sorry?
Can you share your screen?
I thought I was.
Are you sharing the different document?
Sorry, one PDF got taken out from the others. Here we go. So this is the KDA here?
Correct.
And then this is Yorkland, and then this is Devonsley, right?
Yeah,
So-
Devonsley
so-
also goes towards the east.
So what you're suggesting is someone from the KDA could drive north along here, turn right, up through here, turn left, and then they get to 19th, right?
Depending on their origin. They would do that if they're heading east or north. If they're heading south, depending on where they're located. I would think that the key line of decision would be probably where the Richmond Hill High School is, which is where the creek runs through or close by that. If you're north of that area, you would likely go towards the north. If you're south of that area, you would likely go towards Elgin Mills.
Would you agree with me that this is not a collector road here? It's actually a quiet residential road.
Woodstone is a local road, but Devonsley is a collector road, which is
Devonsley is the one that goes like this.
correct. And that's where most of the traffic would use. Yeah.
Route from the KDA to 19th Avenue that you're offering is to go on this circuitous Devonsley route, right?
What we're saying is that we're not offering that for the KDA specifically. This route is available to existing residents that are located in that residential area. And as I mentioned, depending on the origins, the KDA can use that route if they're traveling to the east or to the north.
And this road, Devonsley here, that people could travel on also, although you said it's a collector road, but it's also a residential road with single family houses all along it, right?
Correct.
So you wouldn't want to see long lines of traffic backed up, people trying to get to 19th Avenue along Devonsley, would you?
No.
Okay. And it's only stop signs in here, right? No stoplights?
There's no stops. There's no stop signs on Devonsley itself. It's on the side streets that have, and there's one always stop. So yes, stop signs.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Askander?
Yes, sir.
Questions?
Just if I can go back to Yorkland Street, is that okay? Yeah.
Ask a question.
Yes, I will ask the questions. Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Ron.
Good afternoon.
You're a fellow neighbor, and I did see that you discussed with Mr. Cherniak the route if people want to go east. So what if they want, their direction is actually southeast, and they're located where my house is, which you know it's 71 Yorkland. It's right in front of the south side of the KDA. So does this route make sense? I go north all the way up on Yorkland to Devonsley to go back to the 404?
Yes, it does make sense. It's based on their travel time and what they might experience along the way. If they find that they want to skip making a left turn at Yorkland and Elgin Mills, or if they want to skip going through the Bayview Elgin Mills intersection, they can head north to Gamble and 19th. I observed people doing that today. I drop off my child at the Richmond High School, and many people after dropping off go through that Devonsley to Gamble to make their way to the east and then make their way to the south.
Correct, but that location of the high school is really north on Yorkland, pretty close to Devonsley. If you are pretty close to the south end of Yorkland, that doesn't make sense.
Correct. Anyone that's located further south, as I stated before, they would likely go south towards Elgin Mills. But again, it depends on their destination.
Okay. I don't have any further questions. That's it.
Mr. Carr, sorry.
No questions.
Anyone else?
No, I canvassed everybody in the other room and I got the last quiet no. So that's lunchtime.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
All right, thank you.
So 1:15.